Thank you for being here. Thanks to Benoit, who invited me and then didn't show up, but it's okay. All right, so this is joint work with Catherine, who's sitting right here. And often I would say, blame her, but in this case, blame me, because really, this is all me. So she's just here to sort of take comments. And it's also with Anne-May Lebourdet-Coffey, who was our master's student and now actually has a real job. So this is coming out of her master's thesis. Usual disclaimer. We thank the SSHRC and the FRQSC for funding, and also we use data from StatsCan at the RDC. So thank you, but this is our views, not theirs. Okay. I added this slide yesterday. This is not the first time I do this presentation, but I added this slide yesterday because I recently was on the Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada website. And they have this long, nice report, and they start by saying immigration is a defining feature of Canada. And I thought that was a really good statement because, as you'll see on the next slide, there are a lot of immigrants to Canada, especially compared to other countries, and there are a lot of children of immigrants, and this is what it's going to be about. This is what this paper is going to be about. We're going to look at intergenerational mobility. And to look at intergenerational mobility, you need to have two generations. We're going to have the parents' generation and the child generation. And so then when you start thinking about Canada particularly, in Canada in 2021, the last census, 23% of the population were immigrants, so people who weren't born in the country. That is very large. In the US, it's at 13.7%. In England, 16.8%, and those are even like high numbers internationally. So Canada, large. This StatsCan comes up with some projections. Demographers have projections by 2036, and even like now they go a little further. Up to 30% of the population would be first-generation immigrant born outside the country, and also close to 20% would be second-generation immigrants. So now we're talking people born in the country, but with at least one immigrant parent. That's half the population. And so if we care about how Canada does at the individual level or at the productivity level, or for just as how society evolves, I think the integration of immigrants and how their children are doing is definitely crucial, because we're covering half of the population basically. What we're going to study particularly here is what is called the 1.5 generation. And so it's going to be children. So the first generation are the ones who are born outside the country, who immigrate to the country. Second generation, they're born here. And 1.5 is that sort of in-between generation where you're born outside of the country, but you immigrated to Canada before the age of 18, and so with your parents. And so it's those who immigrated to the country as children. Before I go into the literature, I just want to mention one thing. In between the time that Anne-May, our student, worked and wrote her master's thesis using those data, which are StatsCan data, the linkage keys between the census and the tax data that we use have changed. And so we had to rerun the whole analysis. And so what you see is the previous version. We just basically last week finished running the analysis using the new linkage keys. Everything is pretty much still there, but I will point out a couple places where things might look a little different. And so that's also why we've been a little delayed in sending this out, because we wanted to make sure everything still hold with the new version of the data that we're using. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the literature given the time that I have, which is a little short. But we are definitely not the first one that are interested in anything regarding immigration. There's studies looking at the integration of immigrant children in the population through various pathways and then the various outcomes. And typically, when you look at age at arrival, you will see that the earlier someone arrives in the country, the better it integrate, and especially if they arrive before schooling age. And so school is a good way to integrate and to learn their language if you don't know language and get used to it. Most studies on intergenerational mobility in Canada and elsewhere have not distinguished between immigrants and non-immigrants, especially the recent studies, because often, as we had in Canada, we didn't have information up until this linkage on country of origin. And so some of the literature that's developed earlier was looking at group averages. By group averages, what do I mean? I mean, oh, well, if you look at the parent generation, and you can use country of origin as a way to differentiate people. So you can look at, say, the average income of parents and people in the parents' generation coming from country A, B, C, D, and you relate that to the average income of children whose parents were from country A, B, C, D, and then you get a measure of correlation between parent and child income. But this is group average. One exception to this, which is a really recent exception, is Anna, Zhang, and Zhang, who use the IMDb, which we've seen in the previous presentation, and focus on those who arrived in the country, and they look at whether you're a refugee or non-refugee. Okay, what we're going to do in this paper, we're going to try to look at intergenerational income transmission. We're going to exploit the IID, the Intergenerational Income Database from Statistics Canada, which is purely tax files, doesn't have information on immigration status, but has been used since the work of Korak and Hayes in the 90s look at intergenerational income mobility in Canada. And we're going to use a new linkage with census data. So that linkage allows us to look at, to identify those in the data that are either themselves immigrants or born in the country but from immigrant parents, and has some information also on age at arrival. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to present descriptive evidence, which I think is fascinating and we haven't really seen before. And then the second thing is we're going to try to assess the effects, the causal effect of the age at immigration on intergenerational income transmission for the 1.5 generation. And so what's going to vary here is the age at which you arrive, and we're going to base our estimation strategy for that on Chetty and Hendren's exposure effect paper. In that 2018 paper, what they do is they look at people who migrate within the US and change residence. And the longer, the idea is the longer you live in a place with more mobility, the better your outcomes become. So we're going to do that. We're going to do a version of that, looking at those who move from another country into Canada. Our main findings, so bullet points 1 and 2 remain in the new version of the data. Bullet point 3 is slightly different, so I'll show you when we get to that figure. So basically, the one measure of mobility is what we're going to call the rank-rank correlation, the correlation between the parental income rank and the child income rank. We're going to mostly work using income percentiles. So the correlation is stronger for the 1.5 generation than the second generation. A stronger correlation means less mobility because your income as an adult, but as a child, is more influenced or more correlated with that of your parents. So there's more immobility. And that difference is especially large for those of Asian origin. And then the third bullet point is on that causal effect of age at immigration. And so basically, the earlier you arrive in the country, the higher your income is in adulthood. The previous version, it was sort of clearer that the relationship between age and income was flat until age 10. So basically, not much of an effect of age, and then decreasing after. So those arriving in teenage years had losing ranks at each less year of exposure to Canada. Now we see more decline, sort of like general declining pattern from age 1 to age 18. So anyway, I'll show you when we get there. I'm going to talk to you about the data, then I'm going to show you the findings with the model as we get to different sections of the findings. The data, I'm going to take a minute because I think I'm probably the only one using the intergenerational income database today, but it's based on the same similar set of files, the T1FF, the T1 family files. So it's basically tax files, administrative tax data. The way they are put together, though, is that we start with children born in 1963, and we go all the way to 1985. And we link parents and children in the tax files. That's done when the kids are in their teenage years because you need to have parents and children living at the same address while they can identify the parent-child link. It's not in the data itself, it's just sort of a matching algorithm that's being used for that. And basically, we have from 1963 to 1985, roughly 6 million observations. So 6 million children and their parents. And we can follow them through time between the late 70s, early 80s, up to 2016 currently. The new linkage, here it says 6, that's one of the differences. The version we had to do this set of results, we had, what we try to find is each child and mom and dad in the tax file. We try to find them in the long-form census, which covers 20% of the population, in the 1991 census, 1996, all the way to 2016. When StatsCan released the sort of available in the RDC data, 1991 was swept under the rug. And so now we started in 1996. So we had to redo it. So that's, I think, probably the biggest difference that you'll see in between what we have now and within those files. Okay. It's not, even though we have 5 or 6 census waves, it's not a guarantee we find you in the census. And so we're roughly able to link to the census about 40% of our kids in the IID. But 40% of 6 million observations is still quite a large count. And the beauty of it is that the census should be random whether I find you or not in the census because it's a random sample of the population. And so we're confident that we can go along with this. So we're going to characterize people between, are you a third plus generation, meaning you're born in Canada and both your parents are born in Canada. Second generation, you were born in Canada with at least one parent that immigrated, so one parent that was not born in Canada. And 1.5, you were not born in Canada and neither were your parents, but you arrived as a family before the age of 18. Okay. Income definition, we're going to use total income, Canada Revenue Agency's definition of total income. So everything that can earn your money, earnings, interest, investment income, and so on. When you look at intergenerational mobility, what's important is you're going to have 2 main variables, the parental income and the child income. And so how we measure parental income is the sum of both parents, the mother and the father's income. And we're going to average it over a number of years. In all that literature, it's better to have an average over a certain number of years because you avoid transitory shocks. And so in this case, we're going to average when the child is aged 15 to 19. And for child income, we're going to look at average total income when the child is aged 27 to 31. Okay, so they're both 5-year averages. Once we have that measure of average income, then we take percentile ranks. And the percentile ranks are always measured within childbirth years for both the parents and the children. But for the parents is the childbirth year, not the year of the parents. So when I place you in an income distribution, if you're born in, say, 1980, it's your place within the distribution of everybody that I see that is born in 1980. And same for your parents. Your parents are placed in the distribution of all parents whose child is born in 1980. Okay. So now I have a measure of child income rank. I have a measure parental income rank. And I know I also have a measure of generational status. And so I can show you some statistics. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is just to give you an idea of how many people we're talking about. Here they're groups. Each column is a group of birth years. So 1963 actually means 1963 to 1967. So we're grouping them like this. And we have a total of 600,000 individuals in each of those columns, but roughly the 1.5 generation, roughly 10-11% of our kids are 1.5 generation, 16 to 21% are second generation, and the rest, the majority obviously of the sample are third plus generation. That just gives you an idea. This is the first really cool figure because I think it shows you the story. Here we focus on the 1.5 generation, and what we do is we look at each bar corresponds to one age at immigration. So the first bar is about children who immigrated to the country when they were 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. The gray bar is the mean income rank, the percentile income rank for the parents, and the dark blue for the children. And if I look, I'm going to start by looking at the blue bars, the children. What I see is that if I move from left to right, I see that the rank goes down a little bit over time, well, as age at immigration increases. And so these are the worst outcomes, so to speak, for those who arrive later. But what's really, really striking is the pattern for the parents. Okay, and so if your parents have been in the country, if you've immigrated when you were 1, by the time I look at your parents' income, your parents are pretty much 50 is the average of a percentile rank, right? And so your parents are pretty much around the average. But as I go forward in time, as age at immigration increases, parental income decreases by a lot. And that is partially a function of how we measure parental income. We measure parental income when the child it's the average when the child is 15 to 19. So there's a direct link between age at immigration and how long you've been in the country. And so if you've immigrated when you're 14, and I look at your parents' income when you're 15, it means your parents' income is what is their income the first, second, third year when they've arrived, right? And as immigration is a huge shock. You change country. You might change country and not have a job yet, or you might change country and find a job, but it's not the right job, and then you move job and all that kind of stuff. And so this is partly picking up that effect. But I think it's a very important and real effect in the sense that as you immigrate at that age, you're in a household that doesn't have the same resources as a household who's been there for 10, 12 years. And when you reach those ages, you don't have access to those resources. So this is, I think, one of the first important piece of the story. I'm going to try to be quick on all sorts of interesting statistics that we could show you, but I think importantly, because it relates to our finding of the differences with the groups whose parents came from Asia. If I look at the first group of, this is a region of origin. The first group of bar are second generation children, so those who were born in Canada, so the origin of their parents. You see the predominant group is those coming from North America or Northern and Western Europe, and followed by Southern and Eastern Europe, and then Asia. But the other three groups of columns are the 1.5 generation. And you can see there that those, for the 1.5 generation, the proportion of those who are coming from Asia is much larger and skyrockets. And so that's partly a function of, as if you're second generation, it means you were born in a country, so your parents were immigrants to Canada in earlier waves of immigration, which was more predominantly European, and later waves of immigration are more Asian. But this is going to be part of, I think, our descriptive evidence is going to pick up part of this story, that those who, families who come to Canada with children that are adolescents tend to disproportionately be from Asian countries. Basic model, when you study intergenerational income transmission, the basic rank mobility model is going to be a simple regression where you explain R, the child income rank, by the parental income rank, P, and do it by ordinary squares. What you get is two parameters, the intercept and the slope. The intercept is often referred to as absolute mobility. It gives you a measure of expected child income when, for children whose parents were at the bottom of the income distribution. And the slope gives you the correlation between parental income rank and child income rank. So the slope gives you the strength of this relationship, and it's also called relative mobility. But when you see numbers that are bigger, again, it's a slope that is steeper, meaning a higher correlation, meaning actually less mobility. So I know it's confusing because we call it relative mobility, but it should be relative immobility, really. But that's the basic model. So when I show you something like this, what I show you is a bin scatterplot version of that relationship. On this type of graph, what you see on the x-axis is parental income rank, and on the y-axis is average child income rank. So each dot here corresponds to one rank on the parental income distribution, and what the level on the y-axis is for parents at that percentile rank, what is the mean child income rank. There's three series in there. The blue triangles are going to be the 1.5 generation. Those that are the subject of our study. The yellow squares are the second generation, and the green circles are the third plus generation. So you can line up all those points, and then the fitted lines that are drawn through them, actually we estimated them using the microdata, but you might as well fit them using those 100 points. You just get better standard errors when you use the complete data, but basically the slope is like this. The other thing that I should mention is that the size in these graphs, the size of the dots is proportional to the number of, to the size of the population behind those dots. If you had the complete universe, so if all three of these lines were sort of put together, the size of the dots would be the same because they're percentile ranks, and so by definition they would have the same size. But because the ranks are computed using the whole population and not the subpopulation, then you can have differences. And so what you see is that the immigrant parents actually, the squares get bigger on the right side of the graph, and so immigrant parents typically tend to do better once they've been in the country for a number of years. For the green population, they're pretty much spread out throughout the distribution. But for the squares, the 1.5 parents, the triangles are a bit bigger at the bottom of the distribution, meaning there's a bit more weight at that end of the distribution. Okay, and then the other thing that you see is that actually there isn't that much of a there's a little bit of a difference between the 1.5 and the second generation, but not a whole lot. But there's a big gap with the third plus generation, meaning at equal parental income, children from second generation immigrants or 1.5 generation immigrants typically do a lot better in terms of their own income rank. So that's why the slopes are much flatter, and that's why we say that immigrants are displayed high levels of intergenerational mobility. It's typically you can call it whatever you want, the Canadian dream or the success story of immigrants in Canada. This is what it is. Okay. What we can then do is to zoom in on the 1.5 generation and try to see, do we see differences by age at arrival? And so here what we do is we split that 1.5, those blue triangles, we split them by did you immigrate when you're 1 to 5, 6 to 11, or 12 to 17, which is basically ages that correspond to preschool years, elementary school years, and secondary school years. There's fewer, it's a bit, the dots are a bit more overlapping. Well, first because it's really taking, populations are not that different, but also it's a bit noisier because of the number of observation. Now when we start splicing and dicing, not as high in each category, but what you do see is that for those that arrive, the triangles tend to be a little higher, then the squares, then the dots, and so those that arrive later have, on average, lower incomes, even at the same parental income. And the other thing that you see here even more is looking at the size of the markers. You see that the circles are much bigger at the bottom of the income distribution, showing that those that arrive in later years, their parents' income is much lower, much more concentrated in the bottom part of the distribution, which goes back to that first graph with the huge dip. I guess for you it's a huge dip in the parental income for those who arrive in later years. 25. All right. So I think this one would be interesting if okay. This is also the story that you see for those that arrive whose parents were born themselves in an Asian country. So you do see that same story with a large fraction concentrated there at the bottom of the income distribution. Okay. Once I have those statistics, and by the way, looking at slopes, 0.158, the rank-rank correlation between parental income rank and child income rank for those who arrive before they start school is Scandinavian territory. Like this is these are very low correlations. And I think once you start thinking about not just measuring this, but what should we aim for? What is the ideal number? I don't think there's one magic number, and I also don't think that number is 0. Because if the number was 0, if the slope was 0, it would mean like your parental origins don't matter. And I think you'd like to think, I have 2 children, I would like to think that I mean a little something for them. So, but so I don't think you want to completely cut off the parental investment channel in children. But you also don't want to be in a society where parental income determines everything, right? And so then where that ideal number would be is not necessarily something that I have an answer to. It's more of a philosophical question. But what I can tell you is, looking at this, this is a low number, meaning that immigrants in Canada are very mobile in terms of their socioeconomic mobility, especially from one generation to the next. Okay. All right, once we've done this, the effect of age at immigration. Okay, so this is the last part of the paper, which is the causal part, where we ask, okay, now we've described a few things. Can we pinpoint the effects of age at immigration? And we're going to frame it in this exposure effect type model. So what we're going to do, here I put again the basic model just so you have in mind, but really simple. I explain child income rank by parental income rank. The child is R and the parent's income rank is P. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to take children from the second generation. Okay, we're interested in the 1.5, but we're going to take children from the second generation, and we're going to estimate the model in 2. So that simple rank model where we get from which we get a slope and an intercept, and we're going to estimate it separately by region of origin, here labeled O. So that's the country or the broad region where you're from. Region of residence, so that's the where in Canada you are, and we've grouped, it's basically provinces or groups of provinces. So you're going to have Quebec, Ontario, you're going to have the Atlantic provinces, the prairies, and British Columbia. And birth year, here labeled S. Okay, so you're going to do it separately for those 3 groups. And then you can compute R bar. R bar is going to be the predicted income rank that one has given region of origin, region of residence, and parental income. Parental income because to calculate your predicted, the predicted rank, you're going to use A and B that are estimated from those separate regressions, and then you're going to plug in P, and then you can compute where I think you're going to be. Okay, so these are estimated using the second generation immigrants, but what we're going to do is we're going to then take each child from the 1.5 generation, and we're going to say, what would be your predicted income rank if you were from the second generation, from parents coming from the same country of origin, living in the same region in Canada, and born in the same birth year, right? And so, that's here where we can calculate that R bar, that predicted income rank, that would be coming from second generation immigrants. And so basically what we're going to do, we're going to try to look at, to predict or to estimate the income rank, the child income rank for those from the 1.5 generation, using as a benchmark kids from the second generation, right? And then we're going to interact this benchmark with a bunch of things, including dummies for the age at which you arrive in Canada. And so the earlier you immigrated at younger ages, the more you're exposed to the country, and the more you catch up, or the more you the more quickly, or the more you're influenced, or whatever channel you want to use, but the more you might get closer to that predicted income rank from that's coming from the second generation, right? And so you can think of it as an exposure effect. And if you look at the original Shady and Hendren paper, what they were looking at was exactly the same framework, but within the US. And so you're saying if you're moving from county A to county B, and you're moving earlier rather than later, you're going to be more exposed to those that are in county, what did I say, B? You're going to be more exposed to those in county B than you were if you stuck around for longer than if you moved from county A to county B when you were 12. So you're going to be more exposed if you moved at age 6 than if you're at age 12. And so we're going to look at the additional effect of each of these additional years that you spend in county B, but except for us, it's going to be the time that you've spent in destination region D in Canada. Okay. So those effects, what was the series of coefficients that I'm going to be interested in are those B's that are going to be, I'm going to have one per age at immigration from 1 to 17. And that effect can be decomposed into 2 parts, because now you can be, wait a minute, there can be selection, right? And so that coefficient, you can think of it as being the sum of 2 parts, one of which is the effects of the causal effect that you're after, the beta M effect that you're after, the age at immigration, and delta M, which could be a selection effect. So what I'm going to pick up is going to be the sum of the effect I'm really looking at and the selection effect. And so what I'm interested in is the B, but it's not so much the B, but the difference from one B to the next as I go from I arrive at age 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so then the trick is that I can think of, yes, there is selection, but and the selection can be non-zero, but as long as the selection itself is not a function of age at immigration, then when I look at the jump from one age to the other, then I net that out, right? And so my coefficient, I'm not going to argue that the coefficient that I see is causal, but I'm going to argue that the jump from one year to the other is because it nets out that selection effect that doesn't vary on age at immigration. And we're going to have one comparison where we looked at family fixed effects. We're going to compare brothers and sisters within the same family who arrived at the same time, but because their brother and sister didn't have the same age. So that's another way to remove the selection effect, except our data is not really well suited to do that. So I'll show you why. Okay. Here's the graph that we have. So here's the one that changed a little bit, but I'll tell you how. Okay, what do I see on this? I see each dot here is each one of these B coefficients, right? And so what I'm interested in is each of these coefficients, but also the jump from one coefficient to the next. First version of that, and it was pretty robust when we spliced and diced different ways or tried different specification, always showed this sort of pattern where it looked like if you just look at the dots and their confidence interval, it looked like up until age 10, it was fairly flat. So the difference from one age to the next was, roughly 0, so no effect of age at immigration up until age 10, but then a declining pattern. And so this is the worsening of outcomes the later you arrive at, the age you arrive at. And so kind of arbitrarily looking at this, we put a spline and we said, okay, if I'm going to estimate the slope across all these points, it looks like there's a first region up until age 10 and then a second region. So we estimated separately two slopes. From this, we saw that the slope for the first part was a 0 and the slope for the second part was a minus 3.3 percentage points for each year that you are not in the country. The new version that we have is a bit more, it's less clear, right? And so it still has that downward trend, but instead of being like sort of flat and like this, it's more like I'm always going down. And so we haven't sort of processed all of that, but I think the story still holds in the sense that age and immigration matters, but it's a little less sort of like flat, 2 sections, which anyway was sort of arbitrary because it was kind of like, oh, that's what it looks like. All right. So that's what we had for the baseline model. When we add in family fixed effects, so now we have the kids that are from the same family, which isn't great because the IID is not meant for that. And so if you're if I see you, if you're born in 1963, I do not see if you have older siblings. If you're born in 1985, I don't see if you have younger siblings. And there's like gap years. So we also do not have the kids that are born in 71, 76, and 81. I'll tell you why over a coffee break. And so then if you have a sibling that's born in those years, I might think you don't have a sibling, but you really do. So anyway, it's not great. What you see is larger standard errors. So the pattern is less clear. So it worked a little less for that two slopes, but now we're gonna have to rethink about what it means in our new estimates. This was pretty robust to changing the child income definition, the parental income definition, the way we measure generation, all that kind of stuff. So, and that also hasn't really changed. I'm out of time, so I'm just going to say that those are exciting data to study intergenerational mobility in Canada, specifically zeroing in on different types of immigrants, meaning different generational status. And we do see that rank mobility is lower the older the child is. That third bullet point here with the flat and the decreasing, don't quote us on that. It's going to change, but it's still sort of the pattern is still there. Thank you.
Terrific paper. It's a real pleasure to get a chance to discuss this paper. This paper's been around a while. Marie, Catherine, probably the world experts on intergenerational mobility now. I'm not going to say anything they haven't thought of, but I found it useful to think through some of the identification issues here. Maybe you'll find it interesting to hear me talk about them. We'll see. I'm going to kind of divide, as I think Marie did, divide the results into two different research designs that are being exploited here. In both, our question is, how much does exposure to Canada matter versus individual family circumstance in determining outcomes for children? That's an important question, I think. We're going to observe fundamentally three things here. The income of the child measured at age 27 to 31. The income of the parent measured when the child is 15 to 19, and the child's age at immigration, M. And so the first research design is the standard intergenerational persistence regression. We'll regress the child's income on the parent's income, but now fully interacted with the child's age at immigration. Okay, and so we want to know about exposure to Canada, how much it matters for those children. You think of these two coefficients, AM, as Marie explained all this, so I'll be brief, AM versus CM, right? The more individual family circumstances matter, the bigger C is going to be. The more Canadian public institutions, the public goods of being in Canada matter, the bigger should be A. And if more exposure to Canada matters, we'd like to see CM, we would expect to see, we wouldn't like it, but we would expect to see CM increasing with M, right? And probably AM decreasing with M. So you immigrate later, your family circumstances matter more. So that's the first question that we can ask. And I mean, these pictures, these are so great, right? I mean, the better visualization of what we're talking about, I cannot imagine. You can see the linear relationship does work extremely well. And you can see that it is the case that the later you arrive, the steeper is the slope. And so this is some support for this idea that marginal exposure to Canada does improve outcomes, right? And I guess the only other observation I'd offer on this picture is that even though it seems to matter, it's like coming earlier in life is better in that sense. All of these people are doing incredibly well, right? So the intercepts here range between 42 and 48%, something like that. And again, Marie talked about this. Marie compared this to Scandinavia. When I saw this, what I had in mind was more East Germany, 1975, right? I mean, that seems to be kind of what we should be thinking about here in terms of the ability of people who are born into families that we observe as being very poor to rise above those circumstances. And if we believe this, I guess we, just as we're of two minds about East Germany in 1975, very nice, except for the Stasi, maybe here too, we'd be of two minds. But it suggests to me, incredible success if this is the right way of thinking about the problem. Now, is this the right way of thinking about the problem? Marie did not call this causal, but I would like it to be causal. I'd like to think about the marginal effects of M as being causal here. I'd like to think about one particular reason that Marie didn't talk about, why I don't think they're causal. Right? And so it's these differences in coefficients that we like to interpret as the causal effect of more exposure to Canada. And so one issue I think to think about here in terms of endogeneity of the P's in that regression is measurement error, right? So what if there's measurement error in the parental income that's correlated with your age in immigration? So we're measuring income when the child is between ages 15 and 19. And so you might think that parental income observed at those ages is a better proxy for family circumstances over the childhood for the people who come around ages 15 to 17, right? So you can imagine if we observe you as a poor child when you first arrive, right? So you're in a poor family when you arrive in Canada. You've got that, you've got the immigration shock. And then it seems to me very likely if you're low income when you arrive in Canada, probably you were in relatively low income circumstances before you arrived in Canada as well. So it's kind of a triple whammy. On the other hand, people who arrived at age 5, if we observe their parents as being relatively low income when they're 15, well, maybe that was bad luck that year, right? Maybe there was some mean reversion that tells me that when you were young or on average over your childhood, you weren't that badly off. So that would be one example of how measurement error would be correlated with P as it's measured in this approach. And I think if we think about people who are above median as well, it kind of goes the same way. If you arrive in Canada, you've already got income, and at age 15, your family's already got income that's above the median, you still got the immigration shock. But to me, that very much suggests probably even before you came to Canada, you were in relatively advantageous circumstances. And on the other hand, for the people who came 10 years earlier than the age at which we measure parental income, I'm not as confident that that's necessarily true. So that's my concern here. The marginals may not be causal here if you think that measurement error is correlated in that way. Maybe it's not. Maybe this is less important than the selection issues that Marie is concerned about. But I'd look at this another way. And it seems to me that you could just measure parental income a fixed number of years after arrival in Canada. That raises some other issues of comparability in terms of life cycle dynamics. I think you could control for those. It just seems like another way that would help convince us that this could be a causal story already in the first research design. So what is research design 2? Again, Marie explained it very well, but just to kind of strip it down and remind you, we're now going to try to get at this marginal exposure to Canada effect in a different way. We observe, in addition, the region of origin of the immigrants and their region of destination in Canada, region of residence, I should say, but I'll call it origin and destination. We're now going to estimate an expanded version of the intergenerational mobility specification, where we'll include R bar. Okay, so what's R bar? It's the fitted values from the equation we just talked about, estimated on the second generation sample. And so we'll take your P for each observation in the 1.5 generation sample. We'll take your P, we'll figure out how good second generation people from that origin and in that destination are at rising above their parents. And so now when we estimate this model, the marginal coefficients will tell us sort of how much more exposure to Canada in the 1.5 generation, arriving a bit earlier, how much that marginal exposure helps you to converge towards the income dynamics of the second generation. And so I think that helps to solve these problems of endogeneity here. And again, it's a beautiful picture. It may not be the right picture anymore, but it definitely tells a story, and it's a story consistent, I think, with maybe how we would think about it. It's exposure in something before secondary school that matters. So I think that's a fascinating indication exposure to Canada matters, but I have all kinds of questions. And very briefly, here they are. The first is, how do we interpret the negative coefficients here? What does it tell me that being in a better OD group is actually worse for your outcomes here?
Positive now.
They're positive now. Well,
It's all the same graph, but it's shifted up.
I think there must be an excluded age here. It must be age at immigration equals 0 or something like that, because there's also a direct effect of our bar. So I'm just not sure how to interpret it, but I think it's worth talking about in the paper. The second thing is, notice that these effects are now being identified from differences in the persistence within generation 2 across these OD groups. I think that would be, maybe you could think of it as an instrument, but I think it's going to be really interesting variation that you could visualize. You can imagine, take something very salient like P25 and just plot all of the data points you're actually using, and then on the x-axis, and then let's see how the different ages at immigration are responding to that. That would be interesting to look at, I think. You could demean the data, you could pool them all in the way that Chetty and Hendren do here. It would just tell us more about identification, but it also might tell us about mechanisms. It would be so interesting, right? So, what is it here that causes a second generation group to be doing better in terms of rising above their parents? Is it, take the kind of the hopefully one remaining racial stereotype that's acceptable. Is it Asian kids are really great at rising above their parents' circumstances when they first come to the country? Is that what the variation in the R bar that is relevant here? Is it about language, the ability of these families to adapt a language in the community where they settle? Could be policy, right? Maybe Atlantic Canada has amazing settlement services, and that's why those kids are rising above. So I'd love to see those pictures and then begin to think about those stories. But that's a sign of just a great research design. Thank you very much.